This is episode number 23. Episode number 23 of Office Hours. Today, as with the previous 22 days of Office Hours, we're going to be digging into the old mailbox and pulling out a couple of questions. We're going to do 3 questions about GMing. Today's episode is a pretty design-heavy episode. We're going to talk about game design and how it affects GMing quite a lot, which I think is cool. And there's a question today that I'm amazed that it took this long to ask. I think maybe because it's kind of a generic question, but I'm excited to answer it anyway. It's a big one. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant in the middle of the episode, so put on your rant pants. That's going to happen. If you haven't watched Office Hours before, if you are attending the office for the first time, what we do is I answer viewer-submitted questions. So it's a bit of a time delay call-in show kind of deal. So you can go to my website, www.adam-cole.com, click that Office Hours link. You can fill out the form. It's going to submit your question to me. You're going to record your lovely voice so everybody on stream can hear it, and we're going to answer it. So let's do that very thing. Let's do that thing, shall we? Let's do it. Let's answer questions.
Question for you about prep.
All right.
So I've moved past trying to create one set story for my players and tried out like different preparation techniques such as fronts or NPC focused prep.
Okay. Oh. Well, it ended halfway through. Let's try that again, shall we?
Into the village to...
Oh, this question's being a bit funny. Here, let's try it. Let's try opening it in VLC. That should be better. The question here, you can read it there, is about giving the players... sorry, Hassie, I didn't mean to cut you off there. The question here is about giving your players room to wander around in a sandbox-style universe. You can blame Windows for that. Giving your players the opportunity to wander around in a sandbox-style universe, but not having to spend a million years preparing. I think the crucial thing here, the most important word in this whole setup is stressful. Because often this is a common thing, right? This is something that comes up a lot when you're GMing and you're expected to hold up the Gygaxian philosophy of, know everything or thou art a failure as a GM, which is like not at all true, but it can feel that way. So stress builds up, right? Open world RPG campaigns are often considered the pinnacle of everything an RPG can be, because you can literally go anywhere and do anything and expect to play your character and do fun stuff. This is what we demand in a lot of ways from our role-playing games. When we sit down at the table to play, we expect to be allowed to do anything that we want. That's sort of the draw. That's why we play role-playing games. This openness to any potential action within the campaign world, and that stuff, that responsibility for that stuff, at least, is a lot of pressure on the GM on account of having to be ready to respond to the player's unpredictable urges when they wander off whenever you like. Like you want to be able to, according to the precepts of Gary and Dave, you want to be able to show your players the intimate details of the universe in which they live, regardless of the direction that they decide to go, regardless of what they decide to do with themselves. And that tension can build up between player expectation and GM prep reality, and the monolith of Gygaxia begins to crack. Right? We start to see the problem inherent in that system. Come see the violence inherent in the system. The GMs get beat up by that stuff, and what we often do to respond to that is we over prep. and we run ourselves into the ground. Or worse, well, okay, not worse, maybe equally bad, we railroad, right? We railroad our players because we want to reveal all this stuff that we've spent this time done. It's the idea of, well, I've prepped X, and by God, you're going to go to X, and you're going to have an X adventure because, God damn you, this is a thing that I built. And then the players also want to feel like this is a real world, and you can explore it at your leisure and do as you like. So you're presented with only the option, really the only option of preparing literally everything at this point. Like at that point, when all that tension builds up, all you can really do is prepare everything in the world, right? Maybe if you want to, you can prepare a certain amount of distance. You figure they can't get 100 miles away from the town they're in, right? They couldn't possibly in a single session. Plus the Badlands are in every direction, and right. So we'll prep 100 miles of world and come up with stats and details of every single potential location, and that's just too bad. That's how it goes. That's what you have to do as a GM, right? I mean, you could also say fuck it and not do that. And by that I mean you can work on, first of all, playing games that provide you with tools that will allow you to improvise smoothly and quickly enough so that it will seem like you're utterly and completely prepared for anything. Because that's what actually counts. The players don't know or care if you've actually prepped for anything, right? You can find the wool and you can pull it over their eyes. Because the thing is seeming prepared and being prepared are the exact same thing. So the place you start with, and this is true of so many GMing questions, the place you start with is the system. You start with the right system, and that will put you on a path to doing this in a way that feels like you're prepared. We can all take a moment. Let's all thank the gods of random tables for the dear sweet Kevin Crawford, because he is the top of my designer list for people that make games that make us seem like better GMs than we are vis-a-vis preparation, right? His games are good not because they give you detail on everything like RuneQuest might, but because they're capable of sort of mad-libbing away your problems without also seeming generic, right? Like for example, in Stars Without Number, your setting is planets with tags to tell you kind of what's going on in that world generally, like corrupt government or cheese cult or global warming ignored by local scientists and right-wing government agencies resulting in worldwide climate change and impending disaster, right? We get tags, we get hints and nudges towards what we might want to do with a piece of setting and where we might want to do that thing. And then on top of that, you have factions, which are super important in a game with a large scale. Your game may not be that large in scale. You may not be looking at several worlds. You may not be looking at even a single world. You might be looking at a kingdom. But if you go down into it, if you look at each individual thing, each faction can be as big or as large as you need. They scale really easily. So in Stars Without Number, they're religious organizations or corporations or whatever. But in your game, they might be churches to various gods or kingdoms at war or secret guilds or whatever, gangs within a city. And what factions do is create conflict, which is all any game really is about. It creates background conflict that the players can choose a side on or can be influenced by or affected by at the very least as they play. It creates a what to go along with the planetary tags of the where. Right, and then on top of all of that, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about mad-libbing, every planet in the game, or city in your game, or town, or district, or whatever, can have a few little complications with fill-in-the-blank terms, like a friend or an enemy that you can replace with your own thing. So like in this town, if the tag you want to use is a friend comes to the party with an opportunity for treasure, and then you can pick a complication, and the complication can be the local government is cracking down on immigrants, because you know that the characters don't live here. So you can combine those two things with the existing tags. You can look at the cheese cult and the immigrant crackdown, and you can look at the opportunity for treasure, and you can mix all that stuff up with what the factions are doing in this town, and you haven't prepped this stuff in advance. You haven't like decided every moment of all of this stuff, but you've picked and chose little bits and pieces that you're going to combine together to make your moment, to make your thing in play. And honestly, like, mastery of a big sandbox world isn't even about the details. It's really not. It's not about the tiny individual details of the setting. It's about a larger sense of verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. It's the sense of realness in a fictional thing, a fictional work. It's believability. It's about knowing what the big picture is in your world and being able to zoom in and use your macro knowledge to create and manage micro situations. Right? It's about knowing what factions are at war so that in the moment you can make something of those conflicts. Basically what you're doing is you're given costume pieces by these random tables, and you're going to make a disguise. The disguise is that you're a well-prepared GM. You want to put on your GM suit and have people believe that this is a real world with details, but you want to take the time off of yourself. You don't want to spend hours and hours prepping every possible thing. The thing is, like, prep isn't everything, right? It's often just a crutch that we use to prop ourselves up so that we don't feel unprepared. And as we become more familiar with the campaign world and the campaign itself and its goings on, we're able to shed some of that prep. We can let go of it. We can say goodbye to the piles of hours that we've been doing prep on before, but you can't just do it for nothing. You can't just do it out of the blue. It takes practice, right? You got to give yourself time to practice the art, prep what feels like a good amount for you, and then play a game that does a lot of the work for you. And if you're not playing a game that is amazing as Stars Without Number in that regard, you can do this work yourself. Like, I don't think there are games that you will never be able to be like totally zero prep on. They're just, you can't. Don't believe Ondore's lies when they say that their game is zero prep. There are some games like Dungeon World you can play with no prep at all, aside from knowing the rules. But you'll never play 5th edition D&D or Pathfinder or even Torchbearer with zero prep. It's not possible. And I mean to say, like, using someone else's adventure, that's a form of prep, right? Because you have to read the adventure. But you can't, you just can't. There are some games you just will never do this with. But it's about finding the right amount of prep, right? Less stressful, not spending hours and hours, spending an amount of time. So anyway, if you're playing games like that, and they're not Stars Without Number, they're not a beautiful gift from Kevin Crawford, God of Random Tables, you can make your own, right? You can create random tables to roll on. You can make lists of names. You can make lists of monsters. You can create potentia that eventually you're going to remix and combine to make scenarios. Have events in your pocket. Know what's going on in the big world and be ready to drop in those events wherever you need them, right? Like, so for example, in Swansong, if I know that the Purity Initiative is ready to make an attack, because they're going to strike out against the Midari Syndicate and they're going to use a bombing to do that, I can hold that event. I can hold the Purity Initiative bombing in my little pocket, ready to pull out whenever I need an event, so that when the players go to a world that says, it has a problem with terrorist activity, I can be like, perfect, okay, I'm ready for this. Or alternately, if I just need something to happen, if the players have gone to a world where there is some Purity Initiative or Midari Syndicate content, I can pull that out if I'm not ready for anything else. If I'm like, I need an encounter, I'm going to drop this in. I tend to like doing that, having sort of meta involved stuff that is part of the ongoing campaign, and then things that are just happening as a result of the tension bubbling around in the world. And those things you can drop in wherever you like, and that will allow you to functionally like buy time in your campaign. You know, you've decided to play for 4 hours or 6 hours, and you need more stuff, but you're not ready to do any big, important, significant meta stuff. You can have micro adventure stuff that you can drop in as you go. This stuff helps me feel more prepared and gives me a sense of freedom from that stress. It gives me a sense that I am ready to drop something cool in no matter what else happens. The thing is like, don't prep for your players, right? Don't prep for them. Don't prep to fit their expectations. Prep only as much as you care to, right? If you are starting to feel like you're stressing about the amount of prep you're doing, or it's taking a really long time, that is what I think is the indicator that you're doing something wrong. It's not that you have pressure from your players necessarily. It's that you yourself are feeling shitty about the amount of prep you're doing, and that's bullshit, because it's not. Don't martyr yourself for your players. We're not here to be sacrificed for our players' entertainment. We're players too, right? We get to engage in the game in a way that's fun and good for us, so don't push yourself. And if you pick a game that will do that work for you, then that's going to help a great deal. You can do some work in advance, but don't do so much that you're not having fun anymore. And practice your improvisation, right? Use the basic ingredients that you've built either by a random table or creating these little micro encounters, and prep your sense of improvisation, right? Don't prep necessarily intimate detail. And honestly, it's gonna get easier. It's gonna get easier, and you're gonna get better at it the longer you do it. I promise. That's a thing.
Hello, Adam. I'm Mr. Worst, and today I have a question for you. In one of your earlier episodes of Office Hours, you described Numenera as an interesting setting connected to a very dull system. So I would like to ask, what makes a system interesting and fun to you? Thanks, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Worst. What a lovely way to phrase that question, and also so polite. With a name like Mr. Worst, I did not expect you to sound so nice. I'm just kidding. I've talked to Mr. Worst before. So this question, I love this question. I love it. I love it. Okay, so two things. One, it's such a great and simple question. Two, go to the closet and take out your rant pants, because it's time. We're going on a rant. So I really like this question because it's great, it's simple, it's hard to answer, and I took a long time kind of wrapping my brain around how to answer it, because I think that it's complicated, and there's multiple real answers to this. But I'm going to talk a little bit about something I really care about first, and this is something that I encountered actually in advertising first, and then in game design sort of second, because as you may know, I have a background in advertising, and well, let's get to it. So I've spoken at length, both I think here to some degree and in my channel, in podcasts. I've spoken at length regarding both role-playing games and video games about the concept of fun and how designing fun is impossible. It's fucking impossible, right? You can create a game that does a thing. That's all you can do. You can make a game that does a thing. You can make a game that does a thing well, if you're not a shitty designer. You can make a game that uses systems and procedures and mechanisms of play to accomplish the thing you set out to do with your game. You can make a game with a well-defined aesthetic. You can design a game that has excellent math and probability. If you try to create a game that's fun, you're not going to succeed. It's just not possible. Because fun, and this is why this question being posed to me specifically is so good, fun is a non-universal concept. There's no objective value of fun that you can design for. It's a terrible goal when you make a game. Fun is a byproduct. Fun is the hot dog of game design. It occurs when you combine good design and the right audience. You have to have those two things to even try to have fun, to make fun at all. It's not possible to just be like, we're going to make a fun game. Cool, fun for who? I don't know, everybody. Just everyone will love it. It will be universally fun. That's not possible. Because, okay, let's look at a role-playing game. Pendragon. Is King Arthur Pendragon a fun game? It's not perfectly designed, but it's a fantastic game that does what it sets out to do in a way that I think accomplishes Greg Stafford's goals that he had when he wrote it. It's a game that puts the players in the role of Arthurian knights, and it uses mechanisms of play and procedures of play to encourage their continued embodiment of those roles as prescribed by Le Morte d'Arthur and the myths of the Knights of the Round Table. It is informed by its fiction. It is a good game. Pendragon is a good game. It is well designed. Is it a fun game? Well, I mean, I want to play an Arthurian knight. I want the game to mechanically nudge or, in some cases, shove me towards that role. I want to be rewarded for playing the knight correctly. I want the other players in the game to have the same constraints placed on them so that we're all guided by the mechanics to the same place. And that, to me, is fun. But I think all kinds of shit is fun. I think doing a weekly call-in show about being a tabletop game master is fun. I think playing World of Warcraft is fun most of the time. I like reading philosophy and politics books, though that's fun for me. I like painting my nails and dyeing my hair. All that shit is fun. Is that shit fun for you? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. So how, given that fun isn't the same for everyone, can we even begin to design a game whose parameters include is a fun game? We can't. So don't try. Just stop. Designers, you can't make fun. It's not possible. What you can do is make a game that is good, and you can hope that, I guess, if you want to make money with your game, they're kind of good matches with a big enough demographic that thinks that kind of good is also fun. So to route this back to the original question, let's talk about what makes a game fun and interesting to me, because A, I can answer that question, and B, they're really different. Fun and interesting are super different. So, like for example, I think a lot of stuff that is interesting is not much fun when it comes to role-playing games. There are, for example, a ton of games, Mr. Worst called this one out, there are a ton of games that I love the setting for. I find the setting very interesting, but I find playing the game to be not as fun, if fun at all. Numenera. Lots of interesting setting stuff there. I love Book of the New Sun. I love Gene Wolfe. I love the source material. The art in the book is great. The concepts of the book are great. The game that goes behind Numenera is not fun to play. I don't find it fun to play. I think I don't find it fun because I don't think it's a good game. But that is debatable, depending on the goals of the design. I'm not Monty Cook. I can't speak to his design. White Wolf. Most of Shadowrun. Interesting settings, interesting games, not fun so much to play as written. I mean, the whole OSR, the whole old school Renaissance, huge example of this. I think there's lots of interesting stuff in that space, but I don't find them fun to play universally, or even most of the time. You know, I think one thing that's true for me of both fun and interesting, if you want to be both fun and interesting to Adam Coble, design your game well, right? And what, to me, makes a design good is that it has a cohesive, focused idea of what it wants to do, and its designers have utilized cleverness and skill to make that thing happen in play, right? I love designers that say, God damn it, this is the thing my game is doing. And that's, I'm gonna do that thing. That they're willing to put a pin in it and say, this is it. They're gonna Martin Luther their game design to the wall of the great church of game design and say, hear ye, motherfuckers, this is what this game is about. I think a strong viewpoint about that, backed up by cohesive design, is huge for making a game as fun and interesting for me. I assess just about every game, and I've definitely talked about this before, I assess just about every game based on Jared Sorensen's 3 questions. Now, you can go and look up, there's all kinds of articles about Jared's questions. They're game design, I don't want to say 101, but they're important. They're important questions about game design. And some articles will include a corollary, a 4th question by John Wick, but I'm going to ignore that. I don't like John Wick's design. I don't agree with him about game design, which is fine. His question is about making a game fun. And everything I just said about fun, I've put a pretty firm stake in the ground. I don't think it's possible. John Wick, sorry. I think your question pollutes Jared's original 3. So I've talked about these before on stream, but let's review. So the question that Jared asks are, what is your game about? How does your game do that thing? How does your game reward players for participating in that thing? Right? Okay. Pendragon. What is your game about? You play Knights of the Round Table. How does your game do this? We give you a set of behavioral parameters according to your virtues, and when you attempt to act unlike a Knight of the Round Table, the character takes over and does Knight of the Round Table-y stuff. How does your game reward this? You're rewarded for playing a knight. As you play to your virtues and vices, you're rewarded with more success in the game and whatever, points, right? That's cohesive answer. It's true of the design. Excellent. And for me, if a game can present in its text a thought out, good, intentional answer to all 3 of those questions, I tend to enjoy reading the game as a game. I might not find playing it fun. There's lots of reasons not to have fun with a role-playing game. Setting, tone, material, the rules themselves, whatever. But I almost always like learning the answers to these questions if a game can answer them. I find good design fascinating, but to be fair, I find colossally shit design interesting too, because I don't think that there is a designer out there that makes a game that they think is a bad game when they're designing it or publishing it or talking about it. I think it's like, I don't want to Godwin this, but I was going to say I think it's like how Hitler probably didn't think he was a bad guy. Shitty game designers don't think they're shitty game designers necessarily. And I've read plenty of shitty RPGs in my day. I own many of them. And I've seen what designers are trying to do, and I've seen them fail at it. And it's disheartening, but it's interesting because you can't always look at good art. Sometimes you have to look at shitty paintings and be like, oh, that's why the Mona Lisa is so nice. Sometimes you have to read Rifts to understand why Apocalypse World is so perfect. Well, okay, Apocalypse World's not perfect, but you know what I mean. What's really interesting to me are the games that I've read or played in which the designer's intent is impossible to discern. Where you have this game and you're like, what the fuck were you trying to do with this design? These kinds of games are interesting in the same way that a broken arm is interesting, in that sometimes you just find it happening to you and you wish that it wasn't, but hey, here we are. You just got to get someone to sign your cast and hope it doesn't last too long. So I guess if design is what I find interesting, what do I find fun? Right? Mr. Wurst also wants to know what makes a system fun. And in my experience, the games that I have the most fun with, not necessarily the ones I like the best necessarily, because I can do this with a bad game. You can have fun with a poorly written game, depending on your definition of fun. So for me, I like focusing on games that ask questions. They ask interesting questions. And I don't just mean as a procedure for the players or the GM, right? Like asking questions is built into a lot of games. That makes those games fun. It solicits this kind of play. I mean games that focus on asking interesting questions about the world we've built together, questions about the real world, questions about the characters and their desires, and as a result, the desires and beliefs and feelings of the players of those characters, right? Like, Stars Without Number, as a system, created a stage upon which Steven and Wheat and Jeff and me and JP could trod back and forth exploring the characters in the universe, and that enabled me to focus on presenting scenarios that would ask questions about diversity, about gender, about war, about religion, about parenthood, about love, about death. The game didn't do much of that for us, but it bought us space because I wasn't having to combat balance encounters, right? Sometimes the game frees you up from focusing on certain details and allows you to explore the narrative space above and around the game. And I value that for that game. Similar shit with Mirror Shades. I think we're starting to see some of that in Court of Swords. We're asking interesting questions. And for me, I guess this is sort of funny. So I want my RPGs, and by that I don't mean the objects, the games themselves, but I want my experience with role-playing games. I want them to mean something. I know that's a nebulous thing, but I find fun in meaning, even in the silly one-shots, because I'm a nihilist through and through, right? I believe that there's nothing in the world, no anything that has any inherent meaning or value. Art has no inherent value. Science has no inherent value. Culture, religion, nothing. Human emotion, nothing. None of that has any inherent value simply by existing. And so as a result, that being my philosophical runway, I am thirsty as fuck for meaning, right? I'm desperate to find things that I can create meaningfully. I want to conjure meaning from nothing. And I have fun when tabletop role-playing games help me do that. They enable me to create meaningful stuff. And this is why when I talk about role-playing games, I do so passionately, because I think that they are a tool for creation. And I think the act of creation in a meaningless void is the most powerful act any person can commit. So role-playing games matter. They're a thing. They're relevant. They're meaningful, and that's what's fun for me. Even games that are silly or absurd, because it doesn't have to be a big feelsy political emotional statement to mean something. You can have meaning in the absurd, in the silly. Spending 4 hours laughing about ejaculate jokes in Star Wars with your friends is meaningful. You're making a connection. You're doing something. It's just as meaningful as having big, intense sessions about emotional stuff. So for me, that's what makes games interesting or fun or both. I like well-designed games that let me explore the human condition. I also find it really fun to murder monsters and get rewarded with treasure. I'm complicated that way, I guess. What are you going to do?
Hello, Adam. I was just wondering, how can I better utilize the dice systems that are used in the games I play?
That's a good question. I don't really know why you were whispering, but I hope you didn't wake up whoever it was you were trying not to wake up, Isaac. So that's the only question that's ever been whispered to the show. So thank you, Isaac, for that. I think okay, so this is a thing. I've said this in the past, and I'm going to try to clarify a little bit here because it's worth clarifying the reductive declarative statements that you make on the internet. I've said before that at the context that I think I usually say this in is that at a convention, when you're asking a designer about their game, the stupidest question that you can ask, and this is, I guess, true of a game designer or a game store employee or on a forum or whatever, the stupidest thing that you can ask a person is, what dice does this game use? I think that's a stupid question to ask. But I mean, to be fair, that's me being a bit of a shithead. Again, making reductive statements on the internet. And let's unpack that a little bit, because I want to talk about how mechanisms influence narrative, which influences story, which makes games do things in one way or another, right? Mechanisms matter. And I want to talk about why this stuff and how you can ask this or how you can look at this in a way that's a little less silly. So I think it's a foolish question because, while it's not irrelevant exactly, it's not the first thing you should ask about a game, right? Go back up, read Jared's questions, ask a designer that. Do this. Go to a game convention. I'm giving you homework. Because I'm curious to see what your experience will be like. So if you're a person that goes to conventions, or you have a friendly local game store that you go to, you're comfortable talking to the employees there. They're not scary dirtbags. Here's your homework. So go to a booth where someone is selling either a game they're very familiar with, or they're selling their own game, and ask them Jared's questions about the game. Right? Pick up their book, flip through it, take a look at the art. If you're interested in the game at all, ask them, say, what's this game about? Cool, how is it about that? What mechanisms support that? What's the reward cycle in the game? Because those three questions are so much more smart, and I say that in terms of, like, they're not going to make you seem smart, though they will. I mean that in terms of you're going to learn more about the game than if you ask, so is this like a D20 system or like a dice pool? What dice do I use what's the probability engine for this game? You can ask that later, but less relevant. So it's a foolish question because there are more important things to learn first, because I believe, in my limited wisdom as a game designer, the dice system, the probability engine of a game, should be designed to match the intended narrative a designer wants to encourage in play, and not the other way around. Unless, I suppose, you've designed a probability engine that creates a certain kind of fiction, then you want to design to that engine, but that doesn't happen very often. Let's clarify. Let's get a little deeper into this. So, okay, so think about this. A game in which you're playing two people having coffee together, and the goal of that game is to get to know one another. That game doesn't need the same randomization and resolution mechanisms as a game in which you play two people locked in a room with knives trying to kill one another. Right? Similar setup, enclosed space, intimate situation, two players. Maybe you learn something about people when you knife fight them. Maybe you want to knife fight someone after you get to know them. But the tenor and the tone and the pacing of those two things is very different. And the dice system that you use to resolve moment-to-moment play should be different for those things, depending on what you want to say about coffee shop conversations and knife fights. Right? Let's take a look at two systems. And keep in mind here, I'm not going to go too detailed into the math because, god damn it, I'm bad at math. But this is the kind of thing someone who's better at math and understood probability better could really go into. I'm going to focus on mechanisms creating tenor in a narrative when combined with other systems. So I'm not going to talk about the exact details of the numbers between these two things, but I'll give you a general idea based on how I kind of view and approach them, because that's all I can do. I can't give you more than I got. So in Dungeons and Dragons, there is a lot of uncertainty in your roles. When you're called on to make an action, there is a high degree of not knowing whether you're going to succeed or fail. You know, you can figure that out based on looking at the modifiers, right? You've picked your class or your race, you've chosen your stats, you have certain gear, you've made sound tactical decisions to try to shore up your uncertainty. But ultimately, because the game uses a single 20-sided die to resolve just about everything in it, you're looking at what my old D&D group used to call the chaos plateau, right? You pick up your D20 and you step onto the chaos plateau because you're not really able to reliably expect a certain result. You can build up a situation in which your modifiers can help, but there's situations in which your success and failure state aren't that certain. There's a granular tension over the course of a generally less tense encounter. So the game, what I mean by that is the game is meant to resolve each swing of the sword with a degree of like, oh God, what's going to happen? Am I going to crit? Am I going to fumble? 1 to 20 is like a big number when you're looking at the kinds of probabilities that D&D works with. And usually, though, the outcome of a larger situation isn't too tough to predict from the get-go. Like, at any moment, we could get the swinginess of a 1 or a 20 and exacerbate that swinginess by having a 1 do a really bad thing and having a 20 do a really good thing. Fumbles and crits expand out the swinginess of a d20. And in this case, the dice are creating a very specific kind of feeling in the narrative. When you swing your sword in Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of sort of chaos unless you've explicitly built your character to avoid or to succeed at that particular thing, right? Building up a really high AC gives you more certainty. But also, as we've seen in Court of Swords, there's two characters in there with an 18 AC, which is quite high for level 2 or 3. And what we end up having happening is a lot of attacks on them miss, so they can generally rely on being missed. But if they get hit, it's almost always a crit because I have to get a 20 to hit them. So they go from standing to dead in a single round because the only way to hit them is to cause a critical hit. These are intentional parts of the design. They want combat to feel that way, this sense of uncertainty or certainty, and where those places are in the game. That swinginess is a part of D&D, and it's designed to reflect the feeling of that situation in the gameplay, right? When you reflect on D&D, we care so much about crits because they're meant to feel rare, because they are designed to be the end of the chaos plateau, in the same way that we remember fumbles, because those are the watermarks for us, those far ends of the spectrum. As a compare and contrast, the Powered by the Apocalypse system uses a completely different curve, right? That's 2d6. It's a limited set of modifiers between -3 and +3. Generally, obviously, if you're a battle babe, you can get up to +5. There's certain situations in which you can get much higher, guaranteed sort of success. And those results are divided into 3 sections to create a different sense of reliability than we get out of Dungeons & Dragons, right? You're going to miss on a less than 6, you're going to succeed on a 10+, and you're going to complicate your life, but you're going to move the narrative forward in a way generally you wanted to on a 7 to 9. So in Powered by the Apocalypse, most of the time, because of the way the stats are engineered, you're going to find yourself in that complicated space most of the game. You're going to be in a apocalypse world, and games based on it, if they're designed properly, exist in the 7 to 9 space. That's where that game lives. It's designed intentionally that way. You know, you can interrogate the fiction. You get a plus from there. You can build your character to avoid complications or force them on certain roles, right? Like, if you want to give the GM more control over your character's life in certain circumstances, build them to have a low stat in that case, right? Because that's how the GM gets to make moves. But generally, you can get a pretty good idea about how you're going to roll before you do it. We don't see that kind of high crit value stuff happen in Apocalypse World. We don't remember like, oh yeah, I got that 12. I mean, that happens a little bit when the game opens up the advanced moves, right, where you get the 13+ and start to do some of that stuff, the add-on crits as you go. But generally speaking, you can feel much more certain about how the narrative will proceed when you play Apocalypse World than you would if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, and that's by design. Powered by the Apocalypse games feel like they have a certain kind of momentum because the probability engine in the game is tied specifically to that 7 to 9 result, right? That's the core game state. And this kind of thing is why mechanisms matter. And you know what? It's funny, it's not just about probability or math either. Like, let me give you an example. In Dungeon Crawl Classics, Goodman Games had this mission. I love DCC. It's a fantastic game. There's some weird design in it that I would change, I think, if I played it again. But I want to tell you something about this game and one real specific thing. A thing that I think is the most often mentioned thing about it. So they had this mission when they created it, right? They wanted to create a fantasy RPG that to their audience felt weird and strange and new in the same way that Dungeons and Dragons must have felt in 1974 when it first came out, right? That people picked up D&D and were like, what the fuck is this thing? What is this? This game is full of strange mystery and potential. It's weird. And Goodman Games accomplished that goal in a lot of mechanically procedural ways, right? Like every spell has its own table to roll on. They use sort of pre-Gygaxian fantasy in terms of inspiration. They went weird mechanically, but what I think often gets overlooked as a gimmick, but I think is a big part of that design, is their weird-ass dice, right? So DCC uses dice like the D7, the D13, the D24, the D3. These are regular dice in the resolution of the game. They're just a part of that game. And I think mechanically part of this was to create a tighter control over the probability curve, right? Like a D4 is swingier than a D3. But in large part, and I think maybe larger part, the reasoning for including the strange dice in the game, above and beyond branding, was to make a specific kinetic choice to change the experience of the game. By that I mean, picking up a handful of DCC dice, these oddly shaped solids that DCC requires that you play with, it feels weird. It feels weird to roll a D18. It feels weird to have a handful of D7s. I think the idea here was that they wanted to put you in the mindset that 1974 felt when people who are only familiar with like craps dice, they're only familiar with six-siders, must have felt the first time they picked up a D12 or a D8 or a D20, right? It's a conscious choice and a fucking clever one. And you see it in a few other games, right? Like Deadlands, which is a Wild West game, relies in part mechanically on the dealing of poker hands, which is complex but clever, right? Dread uses a Jenga tower to build tension and create horror. The physical handling of objects is important to the design of a game if the game is designed to be played with physical objects. Like Fall of Magic. Look at Fall of Magic. It's this beautiful scroll with these metal coins you move around on it. It's a kinetic experience. It's a feelings experience. Look at Fantasy Flight's Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, Force and Destiny. Like Fantasy Flight has condensed the long form math and the numbers work of Dungeons and Dragons into a sort of ideogrammatic oracle in its dice pool, right? We're no longer doing math, we're reading runes to inform our fiction. It's a fascinating change to the pace and the content of the game's system. This is why I think that the Fantasy Flight Star Wars feels more like Star Wars than the D6 pool West End game Star Wars. That feels like a generic RPG with a Star Wars poetry layer, right? It's fascinating. It's an intentional choice. And I think it's great. I think it's really cool because system matters, and the physical representation of that system is, in some games, as important as the probability and the math of the mechanisms. I mean, I guess the thing is, and this is a sort of a weird thing for me personally, and maybe it is for you depending on your experience with role-playing games. It asks the question, do we do a disservice to these games by playing them online when they're designed with these elements in mind? Keeping everything that I said in mind about Dungeon Crawl Classics, are we having a suboptimal experience with DCC when we play it on Roll20? I mean, certainly we're having a variant experience. I think if we're being really honest about that, these games are designed to be played in a certain way, and that, yeah, I mean, I think we do a disservice to them. And I don't think this is about the value, and we talked about this in the last episode. I don't think this is about the inherent value of playing a game face to face. I think what we're really talking about here is a game being designed one way and us playing it a different way. We're making a choice to deviate from intentional design, and we are hacking by necessity, right? We're trading a handful of strange dice for a smoother experience in our virtual tabletop. And I think that's fair. And again, I think that, and I've been saying this for a while, I think that eventually someone will design a game whose experience is meant to be absorbed online, first and foremost. That'll be an interesting day when a well-designed game that can answer all of Jared's questions and incorporate online play in a way that doesn't feel gimmicky or tacked on. That'll be a turning point in tabletop RPGs. I think we'll see that space change when we get there. I mean, I think to sort of really answer your question, Isaac, probability, whether it's rolling dice or drawing cards or pulling chits out of a bag or whatever method we want to use to manage, is all part of answering Jared's second question. It's part of the answer of how does this game do that thing, and as such is fascinating. Being able to recognize what type of dice system, what type of probability engine, all of that stuff, recognizing that is going to take a lot of understanding, a lot of practice and work to be able to answer that question. Like, I can't answer it for you because only you know the kind of game you want and whether or not the probability mechanisms of the games you're looking at fit that. I'm still not even that great at it. You have to play a game to find out whether it's a good fit in that way, because I think, like with Burning Wheel or any sufficiently complicated system, it takes time to get your head around it, and maybe you don't want to, maybe you don't have time for that. So as with almost all questions about GMing, my advice here is just to read a lot of games, play a lot of games, and I think maybe most importantly, talk about them with other people who care about game design. Ask questions, posit hypotheses, debate, discuss, because that's what's going to help you understand where mechanisms help or hinder the kind of narrative you want to emerge from your game. System matters. Dice are a part of system, or cards, or whatever you use, and understanding system takes practice. And then once you are aware of that ecosystem game-wise and how that stuff works, you're going to have so much more fun reading new games because you're going to understand what the designers were trying to do. So I guess that's the thing. Like, try new games. Play new games, read them, talk about them. It's fun, or I hope it's fun for you. It's fun for me. And if you find it fun, that'll lead you to a real good place in terms of learning about mechanisms. So that's it for today's episode. Like I said, game design heavy episode. I love talking about this stuff. These are great questions. And thank you to our three question askers for today. If you want to get involved with Office Hours, you have questions you want to submit, you can do that over at www.adam-koebel.com. Click the Office Hours link, fill out the form, and I will get your question, and we will answer it on a future show. Now, I've had a few. We're deep enough into the old Office Hours mailbag, and deep enough in to start having repeating questions. So I'm having to excuse me, look through questions, and if I don't answer your question specifically, it's probably because there's another question that's similar enough that I've already answered, or I'll get to answering. So don't fret over that. I always hope that people can either watch or listen in on YouTube for their their question when it's answered. But sometimes people ask similar questions. Y'all have a shared experience as GMs. So hopefully someone else will ask your question for you. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I will see you next week for episode 24. Bye for now.